gun giveaway. Well, now that I have your attention, the Your Mountain Podcast is working with Gunworks, Vortex Optics, Federal Premium Ammunition, Viking Tactics, Proof Research, Timely Triggers, and Magpul to put together a package of the components necessary for you to build a better gun. Go to www.itsyourmountain.com and look for the gun giveaway on our website. There you can find out how to enter, in addition to review the rules and restrictions to this gun giveaway. Make sure you get your entry in by May 1st, 2019. So head it over to www.itsyourmountain.com. Now on to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. Another episode where I am here, David Wilms. I'm here with Nephi Cole.
I'm still here.
You're still here.
Still here.
Mike McGrady
is still
again MIA.
Not here.
Not here.
2 weeks later.
He's been missing. Like if this were a report card, we'd be calling to have a meeting with his parents.
You know, I'd be okay with that, but I remember recently I was away because my wife had a very important trip to go to Walmart, and you just made fun of me.
I did.
Yeah, and you know how I found out about it?
Hopefully by listening to the podcast.
Because Ryan Bronson from Federal Premium Ammunition made sure to, as I was in, Minnesota at a banquet, to interrupt everybody at the table to let them know that you had called me out for watching my kids while my wife's at Walmart, Dave?
I'm willing to do anything.
Payback.
Anything. Yeah. You know what? I think we've made it. I think we've made it as a podcast. So we've been, I don't know how many months into this we are. We're not even a year in. We're quite a ways into this little adventure of ours.
Almost a year.
It'll be a year in June. We're not quite there yet.
Nope.
But we're getting closer.
We can still not make it.
Here's why I think we've made it. I think one sign that you've made it as a podcast is you have repeat guests.
Yeah.
Right. You've tapped out the well. Like you've found all the great people that are out there. Mm-hmm. And you've cycled back through. You've started cycling back through, and you're like, "Well, you'll do."
Just by great coincidence, we have 2 repeat guests tonight.
No, and actually, I'm thrilled. I think so. We have 2 repeat guests. We have 2 great guests.
You know what I want to talk to you about, Dave? And this is bringing in one of our repeat guests.
Yeah, what do you want to talk about?
Recently, Dave was so excited. Maybe we talked about this with Mike already, to announce on Facebook how you were this year, David Wilms, a hunting cutting edge guy. I am going to be trying copper, and shows a picture of a case of copper ammunition. To which I said, "There's no way Dave bought a case of Federal Premium Ammunition copper." So I immediately knew who the culprit was. Ryan Bronson.
Well, look, when Dave leaves state service and is temporarily in the private sector for however long this thing lasts for him, that's my opportunity. That's my opportunity to send him a gift, because I can't send it to state employees. So I sent him a gift, and I knew he shot a 30-06. And so
does everyone.
I appreciated that. So frankly, I really appreciated the attention to detail.
Right.
It's like, you knew I shot a 30-06. You knew I didn't care
right
about anything else.
Right.
It's just the gun's roughly this size, and you jam this in there and pull on that shiny thingy. Boom.
I mean, you knew that I probably only shot a 30-06. And so, you didn't take a chance. You didn't take a risk. You're just like, here's a guy that'll shoot whatever I send him.
Hey.
Well, what I sent you was not my first choice. So it was the end of the deer season and elk season. So it's, it's time of the year where we're inventory light. We've shipped it out to all the stores and things. And I asked my assistant, do we have any Edge TLR bullets, our brand new bullet, which is a spectacular bullet. And in fact, I was the first person to ever kill an animal with the Edge TLR bullet. I did it with 300 Win Mag in Africa. It was a springbuck. There's a funny little story there. But did I just tell about going to Africa? Okay.
Yeah. As long as it doesn't go anywhere, we're okay with those types of stories.
It goes nowhere. I'm going to bring it back.
Are you going to start talking Weezer now and the redux of it and all that sort of thing?
So that's our absolute best bullet, and it's a long range bullet, which I thought would make Nephi a little jealous because I know he likes to shoot long range. We didn't have any; it was sold out, done for the year. So then I said, okay, how about trophy bonded tip, which is our second best big game bullet? Sold out, didn't have any in inventory. So then I said, nozzler partition, no, those are sold out. None in inventory. So I said, what do we have in inventory? And we had copper bullets in inventory. So that's
also a great bullet, honestly.
They are a great bullet for big game. It was a bullet that really was always intended for elk and bigger game, and it
works for Dave.
And they're awesome. But that's what we had in inventory, and that's why I shipped you a case of copper bullets because
as Dave
that was
said,
what we still had.
Hey, and as Dave calls it, a lifetime supply of ammunition for David Wilms.
I mean,
his children will inherit
it's already in the will.
At least 3 boxes of that.
But I really do. I really do appreciate it, and I really am. I wasn't lying on that post. I really am going to try out copper ammunition. I didn't go into detail why I'm going to try out copper ammunition, but I'm going to. And what what I think is worth pointing out is that a number of people chimed in and said, "Hey, that's been
what I use.
That's what I use, and I've been using it for a long time, and I love it." Yeah. And what do you think?
I think it's great. There's great retention. Like the mass stays intact. I'm really happy with it. I've been shooting it the last couple of years, and I killed a lot of animals with it. And I always have good shots on my animals, but I noticed a lot less bullet fragmentation in my animals. And I got a little kid at home now, so I feel like a little bit healthier about it. I'm not leaving lead behind in the meat, and so.
I've never cared about that.
Whatever the science says, we don't know, but at least with copper, for sure.
So if we were on the On Gravel podcast, which is a podcast that I host, you should download it, subscribe, give it 5 stars. Everyone that listens to your mountain.
Right after you subscribe, download, give 5 stars to the Your Mountain.
You obviously have because you're listening to it.
But if this were On Gravel, I would say the voice you just heard describing his experience with copper bullets is John Gale from Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Hey, I appreciate you saying that. But one thing we failed to mention before we even did that is, I think it's implicit. People are picking up from a conversation. You sent this ammunition, but we never actually said, Ryan Bronson with Vista Outdoors Federal Premium Ammunition. Right.
We haven't, but you guys talk about me on every podcast now because I am in Nephi's head.
You text me every day.
Well,
you are in Nephi's head.
Do you expect me to forget about you? And I'm sitting, I'm like, dun dun dun, I'm working, ding ding ding. Oh, it's Ryan Bronson making fun of me.
Yep. Hey Nephi, what you wearing today? Things like that.
A suit.
That's probably usually the right answer. Yeah. So John Gale.
Yeah.
Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Thanks for being back.
Good to be back.
It's been so long.
I missed you guys tremendously.
We missed you too.
It's
good to be back.
It's the magic of podcast technology, where you're appearing weeks apart, yet you've never left the room.
So if you're listening to this now, make sure and go back and listen to a previous episode for our, who is BHA, and our discussion of backcountry hunters and anglers and some interesting happenings in migration and
learn Arabic.
Spy, former CIA agent.
Yeah.
International man of mystery.
Yes. You weren't here for that. Pretty interesting. We'll cover it. Listen to the podcast.
I'll hear it on the podcast. Yeah. Well, guys, actually, when they hear this one, I'll have already heard it. Think about that.
Oh, I can't do this anymore.
So
put your headset back on.
Quick
make
little
noise.
interesting tidbit. John and I have the same job title. We're both directors of conservation for our organizations.
Later,
So,
we're
right.
gonna
How come John does it so well?
says Dave.
Well, you're currently wearing a shirt with my logo on it, so
So you're doing an okay job.
I think I'm doing fine.
Nephi's got one of my hats on the table. Maybe we're tied.
Yeah.
I think we are. Well,
I think there's a +1 here.
Oh,
We've
man.
got a Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Well, thank you guys
brochure.
both for being here. Also joining us, John number 2.
Yeah.
John number 2, John Zinnel. I work with Ryan at Vista Outdoors. So I do a little bit in the conservation realm, but I do most of our education, conservation outreach efforts. So we work a lot with the Boy Scouts and work a lot with 4-H shooting sports and all those things to get kids out and pulling triggers in safe environments and getting involved in hunting and shooting sports and all those activities.
So how widespread is that effort?
As wide as it can be.
Are you in all 50 states?
Yeah, we cover all over the place. So we work with programs in Alaska. We work with programs in Florida. We go coast to coast and offer our support and help whatever way we can.
he keeps volunteering to go and do instructor trainings for shooting instructors in Hawaii.
I tried.
But
You know what?
we haven't done it yet.
I missed Alaska last year to go to Nebraska.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you guys?
Hey, so we recently released a podcast with Eric Dinger, who lives in Nebraska and speaks very highly of it. And out of respect for him and all the other good people in Nebraska, I would say that Nebraska and Hawaii are probably on par with each other.
Pretty close. I even had lunch. With Eric Dinger, and I listened to that podcast on my flight here to this trip. So I did listen to that. And Eric always he'll tell you, and I'm sure it'll be on Gravel later on, but anytime he goes and meets with all of our ammo team and any of the guys whenever he's in Minnesota, everybody always tells him that they remind him of me. I mean, we're the same people. I think he may be John Zinnel of Nebraska.
I'm really struggling with this whole Nebraska-Hawaii comparison.
It's tough.
Not that I don't like either one, because, I mean, I like both, but I just see them as uniquely different from one another. That's my personal opinion.
Well, first time I was in, those 3 years ago, I was in Nebraska, and I was meeting one of Eric Dinger's employees, and so he was coming out to this huge shooting event, National 4-H Shooting Sports. They host their invitational there every year. So there's, probably 30-something states there, 1,000 athletes shooting everything from, 3-position air rifle all the way to shotguns to rifles to all sorts of stuff. And he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, I'm over here by the hay bale." And I look around and I was like, "Really? The hay bale? Like, never going to find you. No, it's like Iowa in 10-foot corn. I mean, it's impossible."
Yeah, there are hundreds of hay bales there.
So we have
200.
Am I allowed to tell jokes about Nebraska?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so I've got a couple. Right?
You're the host.
Yeah, it's your podcast.
That's true. So
I mean,
Is this like a
I
dad
usually-
joke?
no, it maybe a little bit. It's probably one that it can apply to a lot of states. But we always think about. I mean, it's Nebraska, right? It's Nebraska. It's the place where you can sit on your back porch, drinking a beer, and watch your dog run away for 3 days. Right? You know why it's so windy in Wyoming?
Yes.
You do,
no,
right?
Why?
Because Nebraska sucks
Dun,
and
dun,
Utah
dun.
blows.
So everyone from Utah and Nebraska.
We just lost a bunch of listeners.
And who was the guy who just sent me the how like who from Washington?
Yeah.
Mike,
That's
wasn't it?
still one of my favorite. That will probably be my all-time favorite social media post for here into infinity.
Yeah.
Another great episode, guys.
Except Nephi.
Except Nephi.
I'm watching you, Washington State. You're on my list.
No, if you're not getting hate mail, you're not doing it right. So
So, this, believe it or not, we have not been at the North American Wildlife and Conservation
Are you just making up?
Conference.
Why don't you look at the brochure right over your shoulder and get this right? So the Wildlife Management Institute,
The North
puts
American,
on a,
the 84th North American Wildlife and
This
Natural
guy.
Resources Conference.
just interrupting, like right when I start.
Well, I don't know where to, like, I'm done.
Anyway, yeah, so we're at the, we just call it, for those of us that have been coming for a long time, we just call it the North American. Right?
Yes, for those big timers.
Now, how many years have you been coming to this?
At least 10, probably 11 or 12. I've been doing this long enough that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, that used to be the International. That's what we used to call the conference, because they used to be the International Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Then they kicked out Mexico and Canada. And so now they're just the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies.
How about you, John?
I've been going since about 2006. So a little over.
So you've got, so far, the longest 10-year running here.
Probably. Yeah, I've been going for a long time. It's a great conference. I remember the International, too. It's always like the monikers have changed a little bit over time. The International, the North American, and AFWA, WAFWA, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and there's the Midwestern version. They're all, like, I think, really important, but the North American is becomes sort of the pinnacle where everyone kind of gathers and comes from federal agencies and state agency directors and NGOs and corporate partners and people that really value the importance of being in the same place at the same time with the important decision makers out there really carrying the torch for fish and wildlife at the state level.
I think I found out I had to go last week.
Is this your first one?
It is.
It's a good time to go.
Well, congratulations. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I think.
Thank you very much.
John, how many have you been to?
This is my second to the North American, but I've done the regionals for probably the last 6 or 7 years.
Okay. I think mine, my first one was either in 2009 or 2010. I can't remember which year, but it was right in that time frame.
In all seriousness, it's been longer than a week, but this is the first one I've been to. Very, very impressive. I mean, the numbers of groups that are here, so, as the name probably, you can probably imagine, you have basically representatives from every state's wildlife agency. You have representatives from everybody in the federal government, from BLM to APHIS to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. You have representatives of companies. Of course, I work with an NGO. You work with an NGO, John. So, people who care about natural resources, care about wildlife, they come here in force. And it's been great conversation about a number of very important topics and areas, where people are trying to find momentum to work together on common goals and things.
Well, I'll give an example. We talked about this on our prior podcast with you, John, for an example of how impactful this conference can be, or how meaningful, or how it's viewed in the larger context of these land and wildlife management agencies. As we had this morning at the opening plenary session, we had Acting Secretary Bernhardt come to make a formal announcement. And Acting Secretary, he will soon be formally nominated and then hopefully confirmed to become the new Secretary of Interior for the United States. Right? And he came here to deliver the message and sign a change to an executive order involving migration corridors and partnerships with states and others to be able to identify and protect these places from development, allow these places where we have in particular large ungulate migrations that have been going on for hundreds of years to continue to go on for hundreds more years. He used this conference as the place to announce and then sign that executive order.
Yeah,
secretarial order, right? That shows sort of the impact of this group.
It's super cool to have him here. So then they also have working groups here, and one of those working groups that we sat in on today was interesting. Is like groups that talk about issues from. There was a feral cat working group. That's one that I missed. I'm very disappointed in that.
I missed that one too.
I always have wanted to go to that. It always overlaps with another meeting, but it's one of those things, the whole feral cat issue. I have got a 3-cent solution, CCI mini mags. And I so want to go to that meeting and offer that solution. In fact, I would be willing to probably donate a whole bunch.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Let's just call this one the Ryan Bronson kitty bang bang solution.
Let me give you an I want to give you
I
an
like
example.
that.
I mean, so
That'd be a good name for
being
an
a
app.
Disney fan,
feral cats. I mean, that's a legitimate, serious ecological concern in the country, right? I mean, the number of birds they kill. I want to, and Nephi's signaling like, I got to tell you this story. I want to really quickly, and then Ryan, he's like, I'm not going to interrupt you, but I'm going to try and interrupt you just by pointing at you furiously.
I just want it. I want it so bad.
Let me just really quick. I just wanted to provide an example. So we have the feral cat issues are all over the place, but I was sort of had my first hands-on personal experience with this less than 6 months ago. So we were getting these weird scratching noises under our bedroom window at night, and I live in town, and these weird noises, and then these screeching sounds.
It wasn't your neighbor, was it?
It wasn't my neighbor.
Oh,
so weird noises, screeching sounds, and a few days go by, don't see anything it's coming from under these bushes, so we know something's there, but we can't get under there to see what's there. And then kittens start to emerge, right? Like I think it was 4 kittens start to emerge. So we've got these kittens living underneath our front porch, or right there. So a little bit of time goes by, and like, what are we going to do with this? So contact a friend of ours that runs an animal shelter, like a rescue, right? And she gives us a live trap, and we set it up to catch these. And as it turns out, like the day before we set the trap, all of a sudden these kittens matured, and they were gone. So we couldn't get them all. But we set this trap, and we caught one kitten, and then we caught a second kitten, and then we caught an adult cat that was not the mother of these kittens, because we'd seen the mother, and then we caught another adult cat, and then we caught, and this continued, and we only had the trap out for like 4 days.
Wow.
Pretty soon,
And
nobody in the neighborhood had cats.
Not a single cat was collared, and based on the reaction when we tried to move them from the trap to the kennel, none of them were tame. True feral cats, and even if they weren't, like I guess I just have. They're even if they're not feral, even if they're living in somebody's house, right? They're free ranging cats that are going out and killing birds and whatever else, and then going back home. So
believe it or not,
it was kind of my first exposure. 4 days, and we caught something like 7 cats.
Believe it or not, this episode is not going to concentrate on feral cats, but I am going to use this to tell you an interesting story.
I think we should maybe concentrate on feral cats for a little while.
Well, we had feral cats under our back porch, and so now we own a live trap because we had a very similar experience at the Cole house, and I took them to your house.
That's convenient.
So my family owns a farm in west central Minnesota, and when we bought it in chunks, and the original chunk was all woods, and then we bought the farmyard from the same farmer that he sold it off in chunks to us. And when we had just the woods and we had our camper there, we had to live with the fact that there were these feral cats all over the place. And then when we bought the farmyard and we owned it, okay, this is our property now. We're going to take care of the feral cat issue. The first year, I killed 28. My dad killed 20. It wasn't a contest, but it was kind of a contest.
It's always a contest.
But it was crazy. And then the next year, we killed similar numbers. It was intense. And for years...
This cat harvest brought to you by Federal Premium.
Yes.
Did you use trophy copper?
No, not back then.
No.
That wasn't a thing back then. A lot of 22 long rifle. This was even before the 17 HMR was a thing, so it was all 22 long rifle and 220 conibears. I didn't own live traps. I only had dead traps. I guess that's the alternative.
This podcast has not verified any correlation with state regulation regarding the take of feral cats.
In the state of Minnesota, feral cats are an unprotected species, and you can kill
are
them
in
all
most
year.
states.
Yeah, most places.
And so it was intense and for several years, and we finally got to the point where we were on top of it. And it is amazing the bird population that that this farmyard now has. So we had the same brush lines and everything else then that we have now, but now those brush lines have brown thrashers and they have mockingbirds and all these ground nesting species. We had bobolinks that came back to our hayfields that were nesting, which is a prairie species of concern, and nesting in our fields. We never ever saw any of these things when we had this big feral cat problem, and we didn't realize how many freaking cats there were. But when you're killing 50 in a year and you have to do that for a couple of years, that's pretty amazing when you think of it.
So for people that back up a little bit, for people that don't know, let's talk about this issue of feral. What is an invasive species, right? So what you're talking about in these cases, you're talking about feral cats. You're not talking about somebody's pet cat. You're talking about an invasive species that's out there killing native species, causing habitat damage, habitat destruction. They're hugely impactful in some areas, like, for example, Hawaii, where you can go where there's no, these things did not grow up in this location. These things are these are not indigenous, and they're destructive to birds that, bird species that didn't grow up with that kind of competition.
I think the number is over 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion birds a year killed by feral cats, or maybe just by cats, in the United States alone. That's just in this country, the number of birds that are killed by feral cats. So, we joked a little bit about it, and I'm, telling you my experience, but it's a significant ecological problem.
Well, and it goes to show you that nobody watches the end of The Price is Right when Bob Barker says
spay and neuter.
Right? Nobody watches the end of that.
Right, because how does that happen? It starts with a house cat.
More people should be watching TV.
That runs out and finds another house cat, and they're like, "Ooh, it's a lady."
Yeah.
And then they have a bunch of little cats, and those cats become feral cats.
Yeah,
right?
And it's unfortunate, but really, if you really care, if this is an issue that you care about, then we need to take care of it on the front end.
So that's one of the issues that this conference brings thought leaders together to try and figure out, how do we tackle these?
Yeah,
how do we share resources? How do we share ideas? How do we address this issue?
And it kind of come full circle. One of the things that we talked about, we talked about feral cats, and then I gave you a hard time about because you switched to copper ammunition, which is like, thank you very much for the the ammunition. And so there's concern. One of the things that we get talked about at this conference was the impacts on California condors and some of the decisions that were made in California in terms of, you had a scavenger population of birds that was ingesting some lead. And so in that ecosystem, there was a choice made that said, like, what, we need to do something about this. People here, you're going to use lead alternative ammunition.
And it wasn't that they were just ingesting lead. California condors were dying.
Yeah.
Right. That's, we just have to say that they were dying from lead poisoning.
Well, and then the population is so small, and this is something I come back to frequently when people are talking about, what was the population of condors at the time? Yeah. And so over a 20-year span, if you lose 20 years, and this was the fact, it's like over this period of time, if you lose 10% of your population over a 20-year span, you only got 200 birds. That's a big deal.
And it's a slow reproducing bird, long-lived, slow reproducing, has significant population impacts.
Yeah. And so, and this, of course, begets other discussion about, okay, well, if this is true with the condors, is it true elsewhere? And so, people, are looking at that and saying, okay, what are the lessons we learned from condors? What applies someplace else? What does not? And as part of that, one of the discussion points that comes up is like, okay, well, if you're talking about, lead, so it's, so I'll just give out some geeky wonky stats about lead, which is, there was a study that came out of Canada, and we're looking at the deaths of raptor species. And when you looked at, what's the number one killer of raptors? Unfortunately, what is it? Anthropogenic killer of raptors. It is collisions. Collisions with man-made objects, whether they be fence lines or power poles or automobiles, and that's like 50% of your anthropogenic deaths. And then when you went down the list, of course, what did you run into? Feral cats. And then you also ran into, and then at the bottom end, you see about 3% or less is where you see toxins, which is where that would come into play. And some companies have done some extremely good work now to say, okay, well, in those areas where we need to find alternatives, some companies have made some great work on some of those alternatives. And so, for example, Federal Premium Ammunition, you guys today at that group, you talked about something that you guys are working on, which I think as a hunter is really exciting.
Yeah, so as we've come to market over the last 30 years in the ammo market, whenever you came out with an alternative to lead, you almost always had to deal with performance.
Somebody's saying, look, it's not
declines.
it doesn't perform as well.
So steel shot is not as effective as lead shot simply because it's not as dense, and so we've had to make it faster, all those things. Copper bullets don't expand as much as lead bullets, so for smaller size big game animals, it's not the optimal bullet. So so you've got trade-offs. You always have these performance trade-offs.
There's a choice.
So we've come to market. We've been using tungsten-based shot for a number of years, but last year we came to market with a product that hand loaders have been using for a while called Tungsten Super Shot. So here's the density of pure tungsten is 19 grams per cubic centimeter. Lead is 11. And this Tungsten Super Shot it's an alloy. There's some other things mixed in with it, so it's slightly lighter, but it's 18 grams per cubic centimeter. So it is way denser than lead. As a result, we can use smaller shot pellets. And when you're shooting a shotgun, the more pellets you have in your pattern, the better you are. And so if you go to smaller size pellets, you can put more in there. So we are using it right now in a turkey application. And traditionally, most turkey loads were number 4s, 5s, and 6s in lead. A lot of times copper-plated lead. And so that's what we've had for a long time that people have used to head shoot turkeys. Well, with this Tungsten Super Shot, we're able to use much smaller shot. So we're using 9 shot, and this year we came out with a blend of 8 and 10 shot. And longtime shooters sometimes have troubles getting their head around the concept of killing turkeys or any bird with shot that small. But the thing you got to remember is it's like comparing a ping pong ball to a golf ball. They're about the same diameter, but the golf ball is way denser, much heavier. And you don't want to get hit by a golf ball, where a ping pong ball is not such a big deal. Well, tungsten is like the golf ball in this case. So you can actually shrink it down and have it smaller, have more pellets in the pattern, and it's great. Problem is, we've got about 15 states in this country that have regulations that prohibit shot smaller than number 8 shot for use on turkey hunting. And those regulations were in place, based on old technology. They were trying to regulate lead shot, and they didn't want people using too light a shot. And it's a little nanny state-ish. We have a whole bunch of states where there are no regs on that, and they don't have any problems with wounding loss or anything else. But so these 15 states or so have this regulation. So we've come to market with a non-lead alternative, which can help achieve some of the goals that folks have trying to reduce lead in the environment. But the problem is, in those states, a whole bunch of New England states, a few Midwestern states, and Nevada, we can't market it because
I'm assuming
it's
Nevada
prohibited.
wants you to just use copper, locally sourced.
You would think so, but no. The issue in Nevada is they don't allow 410s, and that's one of the great advantages. By going to this small shot, we now can make a payload in a 410 that delivers 300 pellets, which is the equivalent to a 3-inch 20-gauge load with number 4 shot. So it's got the same number of pellets as that, which is legal everywhere. Except you actually get better long-range performance out of a 410. The little piddly 410 can be a legitimate turkey gun.
That's what I used to. I learned to hunt with a 410.
Yeah.
My first dove hunt, my first several years dove hunting was with a 410. And you want to talk about a situation where, you have to be dedicated to the cause and to the sport, and okay with missing a lot.
410 dove hunting.
It's a damn humbling experience.
Like be an 11-year-old with a 410 dove hunting for the first time, and want to go back again.
But how many of us like grew up like shooting 410s, right? Like it was like a great entry level gun. It's not going to kick you like a mule, and it's something that is often handed down from grandpa down to you. Like I think we all have like good 410 stories, and so Ryan's talking about like in some ways you're becoming more effective with the technology advance in ammunition, but the cool tradition, like heritage side of things, like being able to kill a turkey with, great grandpa's 410.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Is a cool kind of thing to be able to do and to help promote states to change some of the regulations that are maybe a little antiquated and behind the technology and the advances that Ryan's talking about in ammunition. Like, I think that's a cool way to help entry-level hunters get into the game, right? And feel comfortable with it. And maybe they're not going like dove hunting with their 410 like Dave, because that's a big challenge in and of itself. But, maybe shooting some turkeys with those great turkey loads with the 410 would be a cool way to get, a 10-year-old out hunting for the first time.
I think about it. Yeah. So I was thinking about it from the standpoint of hunter recruitment.
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
it's huge.
And
just the weight of the gun, right? So you get that turkey coming across, and you get a 10-year-old sitting there and trying to hold up a 20 or 12 gauge with that extra weight. You get that 410 as an option now to where it's lighter weight. You're not going to have the recoil, so you're not going to have that as an issue, and it's huge. It's a great opportunity.
And when you're practicing, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you don't feel no kid feels the recoil when they're out there actually, shooting a turkey or shooting doves or whatever. But when you're trying to become proficient with that firearm and you're shooting clay pigeons, you feel every one of those shots. And when you've got a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old, whatever it is, you're taking them out to the range and getting rounds through that gun. If they're shooting something that they're feeling and it's hurting, then all of a sudden that's going to impact how they're shooting. It's going to impact their confidence, and it's also going to impact their desire to want to go out and actually hunt. So providing them with comfortable opportunities, it's a great recruitment opportunity as well.
It's also a retention one, because there are guys, Jason Hart is a good example. He works for Mossy Oak. People in the industry know him because he's done a lot of things. He can't hold a job. I hope he's listening to the podcast. But he's with Mossy Oak. But he is an expert turkey hunter and is on this quest to get a turkey in every state. Well, he has killed grand slams with 28 gauge, with 20 gauge, with 12 gauge, and he's working on his 410. It's a retention tool for him. It's his new challenge. And there's a lot of guys out there that, are looking for those new challenges, the slams. The 410 slam is something that, when you get on the forums. It's
unattainable, right?
Yeah.
So kind of following up on that, I think one of the exciting things about changes in technology that that people need to look at and embrace in terms of firearms is when you're trying to get people new into hunting or get people to come back, this will sound cheesy, but advancements in cartridges are doing some great things that are making it easier to get people into to the field and to let them practice in a way that doesn't punish. So I know for me, it used to be that 300 mag Win Mag was like that's what you needed to go into the field with, and you're carrying a 300 Win Mag, and mine was pretty light. And it's tough for people to get to the range and practice with a gun that's a punishing gun. But that's what you thought you needed to do. And now, some of the other cartridges, some of the bullet technology, whether it's, whether it's switching to a bullet that holds together really good or whatever, allows people to maybe go to a 308 or to start or to hunt with a 6.5 Creedmoor or makes the 270 more effective. And I think all those are tools that, as technology moves forward, don't be scared to look at, what you're doing and to question whether or not you need to carry, a howitzer into the field, because the reality is, that may be great. And if you're a howitzer guy, that's fine. But there are some great tools that are out there that make it easy to get out into the field, and they're great for your kids and they're great for your better half. And my buddies, like I've taken new hunters every year. I try and take somebody new and get them involved. And my go-to now is like 6.5 Creedmoor 308.
So what if we had a situation where there were 15 states in the country that didn't allow the 6.5 Creedmoor for big game?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the equivalent to what we're dealing with right now with these turkey loads.
So, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to ask you. So you talk about the 15 states. What's the reception been as you've gone into these states and said, "Hey, let's look at making some changes"?
Well, it's a mix. A lot of states just haven't done it because they haven't kept up with what's happening. There is people have a preconceived idea about what shot can do. So when you talk about small size shot, they have troubles getting it through their heads. And it's almost always the old gray-haired turkey biologist who, I've been doing it this way in my state all along. Why would we change that? I was able to kill a turkey in 1972 with my 12-gauge shooting number 4 duck loads at the time. Why do we need all this fancy stuff? We hear that. We hear you're just doing it to sell more ammunition. Well, no, Sherlock. I work... I work for an ammo company.
Explicit.
Bleep. We can't say the S word. So.
Well, you just did.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to sell. I am trying to sell more ammo, but when you look at it, we're trying to create innovative solutions for problems that people have. And for me, with my 9-year-old, he's going to hunt this year turkeys in Minnesota with the 20 gauge. He could have hunted last year, but he could not hold up the youth model 20 gauge to be able to aim it like you need to do for turkeys. That was the limiting factor. It wasn't the recoil. He could handle the recoil, especially for one shot. So my son last year didn't hunt turkeys, even though I had a tool in my gun safe that would have enabled him to be totally effective at it. That's a frustrating thing.
Turkey hunting is one of the best intro hunts for people.
I really think it is.
Oh yeah, gateway for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's because let's face it. Don't tell too many people, but it's like miniature elk hunting.
Mm-hmm.
It is
It's
interactive too. I mean, you get calling, you get decoying, you get the whole 9 yards.
Yeah,
I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we've been getting into turkey hunting, and it was a great way to get her out in the field. Like when she was younger, the trick was keeping her quiet, right? Like so. I call it the Jolly Rancher method. Keep the mouth busy and full, and kids love candy, but she's petite, and I have the same conundrum. I think that she's ready to hunt herself now, and there's a lot of legal states where you can start hunting turkey and small game before you turn 12 years old, and having a gun and a cartridge that fits that age and the tiny body size, I think would facilitate a lot of youth getting more involved earlier on, especially when they're ready. That's a parent decision, obviously, and they need to go through all the safety regimens and study and learn and be good hunters in the field first. But there's a lot of people that are ready at that age to do it, and you have that limitation that is more physical in nature, and you have a solution for it and not being able to implement it. It can be frustrating at times, and it would be nice to eliminate that barrier and work in those 15 states to help create opportunities for kids. And like I said before, there's something cool about taking like grandpa's gun or great grandpa's gun that's been hanging on the wall for a while and put it to use and kill your first turkey with it, and be able to tell that story to your kids one day when you get older, and maybe pass that same gun down to them, because I feel like everyone's got that 410 hanging on the wall and they don't shoot it as much, and something like turkey hunting is the perfect time to use that gun.
Yeah. So, this conference, there's been a lot of discussion of that recruitment, retention, reactivation, getting people out. In fact, I'd say if there was a huge theme here, R3 has been a huge theme, as has access, and then the ties between those two things. And when you look at the amount of people who are here who are, paddling in the same direction, and everybody at this conference, they're not all on exactly the same page. So, BHA, San Diego Zoo, the Conservation Fund, TRCP, National Wildlife Federation, Pheasants Forever, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, Audubon, Bass Pro Shops, the Western Governors Association, Houston Safari Club, Defenders of Wildlife. along with Arizona, Oregon, Montana, Pennsylvania, Texas, Colorado, Indiana, New Jersey, Connecticut, Wyoming,
This
Wisconsin.
is compelling radio, guys. I just
So
want you to
I
know.
didn't
I'm
know he was
saying
going to do
this-
this.
Sounds like a country song.
These are all the different groups that are here that are all working on these issues. Another issue that they're all working on, that they're all talking about, and they were all in a meeting together today talking about, is what has been called the opportunity for the PR opportunity, the Pittman Robertson opportunity of our generation, Recovering America's Wildlife Act. So there was a big meeting today where all these folks, again, from people from different industries, people with, whether they cared more about, fish or bird watching or hunting, all saying like this is an important thing. We can all work together on something that is not bipartisan, nonpartisan. What is it? Why is it important?
Yeah. So I'll tee it up and then I'll just let it go where it goes, right? So a committee called the Blue Ribbon Panel, right, was formed a number of years ago, and it was co-chaired by Johnny Morris of Bass Pro Shops, CEO of Bass Pro Shops, and I guess now of Cabela's, right? And of former Wyoming Governor Dave Friedenthal. And they served as the co-chair of this committee to figure out, okay, let's start. We got to figure out how to get more money back to states to do on-the-ground management. Part of the idea was how do we prevent species from going from plentiful to at-risk to threatened or endangered and federally listed, right? How do we get more resources in the hands of states to be able to address these conservation needs in their states, these management needs in their states? So this committee formed, and over a period of time, met and came up with recommendations, and they centered on this one idea. They looked at effectively a diversion of funds, existing revenues coming in from offshore oil and gas development, right? So the idea was, there's so much oil and gas, there's so much revenue generated from leases from offshore oil and gas development. We should take a portion of that and dedicate that back to states, right? So this idea was born. Over time, I'll give you guys a second to get comfortable. Pop, pop, pop. So the idea was born, and then it was, okay, how do we do this? And so it was, one of the leading groups was the Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and then there are a number of other organizations involved in crafting legislation to say, okay, what would this program look like? And how would we build an allocation formula to take what turned out to be $1.3 billion, right? $1.3 billion, and allocate that money then to the states. And so all these groups worked together, worked with folks on Capitol Hill, got a conceptual bill together, an allocation formula together, and started shopping this bill. And this would have been probably 2 Congresses ago.
Yep, this will be the third cycle for
it. Right. The start, and this is a fascinating part about how Congress works, because there's actually pretty broad bipartisan support for this concept.
Yep.
Right. Every time it's been introduced a couple of times. It hasn't been introduced in this Congress yet, I don't think.
It looks like a few weeks out.
It should be coming soon.
Probably right about when this podcast launches. It'll be hitting the.
It's coming. It's coming soon, right? But each time it has dozens of sponsors or co-sponsors. I mean, there's bipartisan support. Yet it's a bill that, despite support in both the House and the Senate, hasn't moved at all yet. Right. And so, that's something I want to talk about. Why hasn't it moved? Another thing I want to talk about is what do you guys think of this of this bill, or the concept anyway? Do you think it can be effective? What can this kind of money do for states? Right? So let's open the floor up. I did, and also correct the record if I misstated or missed important pieces of the history
Dave,
of this.
Just kidding. You did a great job. But last session in 2018, there were 116 co-sponsors on this bill.
That qualifies as dozens.
Yeah, 116.
Almost 10 dozens.
Yeah, dozens.
And basically equivalent, and they did this on purpose. So the people who were putting the bill together, they tried to make sure that when they had a member of one party, they brought a member of the other party to truly show something that is extremely important that we haven't talked about yet in the podcast, but I wanted to at some point. We can get past partisanship. And so they tried to make sure that they had people, on both sides bringing this. 96 of those have returned in this Congress. So 96 of those folks who sponsored in 2018 are back. So with that, I think that's important.
That's a good call. BHA has been working on this legislation along with a number of other partner groups, and there's kind of a cool history with the idea, like the original state wildlife action plans and the state and tribal grants program that was originally set up to direct funding and resources to non-game species. Like the concepts have been around for a while, with the idea that if we take care of species before they become threatened and endangered, we save states money. We save the funding that would be normally allocated to the emergency money. You can kind of equate it to how we deal with human medical and health conditions, right? Like emergency room visits are super expensive. If we allocate resources to make sure people are getting physicals and regular health care, you limit the number of emergency room visits, right? Same can apply to wildlife. It's expensive once they become threatened and endangered. And if we can do more to prevent them from getting there in the first place, and while the focus may be on non-game species, if you're looking at, sagebrush ecosystems out here in the West, or resilient forests in the East and things like that, if we improve habitat conditions for non-game species, we're also improving habitat conditions for game species. And so what the Recovering America's Wildlife Act is doing is bringing together stakeholders and constituents from multiple interest areas together for the same cause, because they see the benefit of putting resources there. And if we are smart and thoughtful about it, and we're taking that $1.3 billion from existing revenue sources, and we're just directing it into this instead of burdening taxpayers, that makes a lot of fiscal sense for fiscal conservatives who are hawks on the budget and don't want to burden taxpayers and have to answer questions when they go back home and talk to their constituents. And it makes sense for anyone else on the other side of the aisle that wants to see good things happen for the environment and fish and wildlife habitat too. And so I think that's why you're seeing such broad-based support for it. But to Dave's point earlier, I think a lot of frustrations that we have in the community, but also Americans have in general, is some of the dysfunction in Congress and why we can't pass a popular bill. We've seen this with other legislation before, and this idea that a single bill can't pass on its own. It has to be included in some type of package or attached to something that must pass, whether it's military spending or some type of budget bill. This is, I think, a broader conversation that probably merits its own podcast in general, like how we work together to help improve the way we govern as a society and move things in Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C. And there are going to be things like Recovering America's Wildlife Act that we want to move in the time being. And our goal is really to make all decision makers and all elected officials everywhere really empowered to feel this is a priority issue for them to advance on their own. And I think there's a real possibility of doing that.
So why do you think that you can have more than 100 co-sponsors on a bill? You can have and the other piece to be clear about is just because somebody doesn't co-sponsor a bill doesn't mean they don't support it. They just
That's
haven't put
right.
their name on it, right? So I know there are a lot of members of Congress that, even though their name wasn't attached to it, still support the concept. They just weren't co-sponsors. So how can you have something with so much support that doesn't get across the finish line, or hasn't gotten across the finish line yet? I guess the big question is, what are the flags? What are the concerns that are preventing this bill from moving?
Look, let me tell a story really quick that's not going to go in. Just kidding. It's going to go someplace. But so, you said what can keep something like this from moving? What are some of the impediments? There was a recent bill to modernize the Pittman-Robertson Act. And then there was some efforts on a target and marksmanship improvement bill. So there were some efforts from the hunting and shooting community to move a bill forward that is it's bipartisan, popular on both sides, has the votes to pass, whether alone in the Senate or in the House. But an interesting thing happens. Something is so popular that people have maybe something that's not quite as popular, and guess what they try and do? They try and hold this one up.
I know that's what John was saying, sort of hinting at. I was going to let him actually be the one to kind of do that.
Well, I was going to say that this happened with this, and then I was going to pass the ball back to John and say, not unique to this issue is this practice of finding something popular and then saying, well, what else do I want to hook up to it?
Yeah, well, and the reference you just made is an important one, I think, that actually fell prey to more of a procedural element. There was a concern that legislation regarding the modernization of Pittman-Robertson dollars, because of the way Congress works, there are some procedural elements that they call it a blue slip, right? Like they call that provision got blue slipped out of Senate Bill 47, the Natural Resources Management Act, now being referred to as the John Dingell Jr. Natural Resource Management Act after the late Congressman John Dingell. A great legacy in that family of serving in Congress from his father to his wife, and a really proud thing that they've done there as conservation family. But the reference you made, like that was a procedural move, but widely popular, like you said, and just because it may have originated it should have originated in the House in order to get past some of those procedural hurdles. Like there's some things that we contend with that, sometimes we get a good idea and we move it forward, and then something like that stops us. Or individual pieces of legislation are difficult to move on their own. So there's been this practice of packaging them together in omnibuses, or in the case of the current administration, which doesn't really like the omnibus practice, like started moving these things called minibuses, which is like tinier packages versus these bigger packages. And so it's more about the political dynamics at any given time, allowing things to move through at the leadership level. And sometimes the widely supported pieces of legislation like this that we're talking about that are extremely important to us in our community and our constituency, when they're stacked up against, immigration, and they're stacked up against nuclear, and they're stacked up against Iran, and things like that some of our elected leaders are contemplating, doesn't register on their radar in the same way it does with us. And so I think we see those falling prey to the political dynamics at any given time too. And it is unfortunate, but we are seeing movement in that direction. The bill I mentioned a minute ago, Senate Bill 47, it was recently passed by the House. Just 2 weeks before that, it was passed by the Senate. It includes a similar provision called the Land and Water Conservation Fund that many of us have been fighting for and advocating for a long time.
For years.
For years and years.
Yeah.
The coalition originally came together to dedicate mandatory funding to the program instead of having to rely on authorized funding that was going through an appropriations process. But then it became about getting the program authorized in the first place, which none of us ever contemplated was ever going to be an issue. But it became one, and we finally got that done, which is amazing, and a huge victory that we get to celebrate during this administration, and something that 2019 has brought America's hunters and anglers and people that care about all things wild. But it's another example of a hugely supported piece of legislation from both sides of the aisle that languished Congress after Congress after Congress after Congress. It failed to be authorized a little over 3 years ago, and then expired again in December, and we were facing the same problem over again. And so I think the more that we can work together and find ways to elevate the importance of bills like this that really make a difference, the more we're going to be able to get beyond some of that. But there's also some, I think, political dynamics that we are always going to have to be faced with that are going to be a problem.
You know, you brought up when you talked about Land and Water Conservation Fund, I think it was 4 years ago, maybe, we were in a podcast with Steve Ranella.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And we sat down, and I was working for Governor Meade at the time, as was Dave, and we were doing, in the National Governors Association, we were working on LWCF. And we had recently done a letter, and it was a challenging little piece of theater that was going on, because you had a member, powerful member of the House, who had some concerns with LWCF, and then you had the nation's governors who were led by, interestingly enough, the leadership of natural resources at the NGA was Wyoming and California. And so Governor Brown and Governor Meade, a Democrat and a Republican, who came together, hammered out a letter along with a couple of key issues that said LWCF is important. It should be reauthorized. Here's some principles that we believe in, and they were able to come together and do that. And we talked about it, and that was one of many letters that went from up there to the committee working on that issue. It took some time, and it took some patience. And I think one of the things that's tough in our current political climate, it's tough for people to have that patience and that time without getting frustrated and saying something in a way that takes away from that effort. And by that I mean, like, it would have been really easy during that LWCF work, that 4 year plus work, to get mad and just start throwing bombs and that could have ultimately destroyed the entire effort. But with patience, with pragmatism, people were able to get, to a large degree, to move the hyperpartisanship, the hyperpartisan voices off to the corners, and to find that consensus that was able to ultimately, find a vehicle to get LWCF through, to, get the consensus there to be able to move it. And I think that's a political lesson that we all have to, be cognizant of, is that patience and that humility to take something important and say, no, man, let's do the missionary work to get people on board and move this.
Well, let's not forget we're not done with LWCF yet.
Now, right? We've got it.
So we're halfway.
LWCF's
been permanently reauthorized.
Hopefully by the
president will have signed it by the time this podcast airs.
Yeah.
But there's another thing that the president is likely to do, which is, and I know this is a symbolic move, and Congress is going to have to respond to this, but I believe last year when the president made budget recommendations,
right,
the amount that he recommended for LWCF was I don't think it was zero, but it was real close to zero.
It was essentially eviscerating the program and rendering it ineffective.
It was like $5 million or something like that for a program that's authorized
at $900
million. And actually, it was authorized at $900 million decades ago, right?
Yeah.
And if you were to do an inflation adjustment to today's day, the actual dollar amount for that authorization, if you were to just do an indexed inflation adjustment, would be something like $3 billion.
Yeah.
But we have the president proposing $5 million. So the next battle, or the next, maybe I shouldn't call it a battle, but the next place for patience, the next place to try and work together is
securing the funding stream.
How do you fund it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, that's a great point. Like in the budget, the president's budget is always an indication of the administration's priorities at a given time. The good thing and the bad thing, depending on the issue and the time and the president and the current Congress, is that Congress rarely takes the
They just
president's
rip
budget.
it up.
Just
rip it up.
It's a
toilet paper.
recommendation
Yeah.
at best, right?
It's toilet paper.
So when they came out with it, like fortunately Congress, realized the importance of LWCF, maintained enacted levels, and actually gave them a little bump even last year. But it was still only about half of the original $900 million authorized. And some like nuanced policy, geeky stuff that guys like Dave and I will dig into. Like people don't understand when a program's authorized at $900 million a year, that doesn't mean that they get that money. It still has to go through Congress. It's basically saying like, Congress, we have $900 million in the bank account. You should write as many checks as you can up to $900 million. But they rarely write the checks for the projects, even if the projects are there and worthy. And LWCF's only been funded 2 times fully in its entire history. And so, like I mentioned before, the original purpose of this coalition of organizations that came together was not to worry about authorization of the program, because it was never in question. Like, it was so popular, so great. Everyone loved it so much, and it was doing so many amazing things on the ground. Like, of course it would always exist. But then, when it didn't in 2015 and it was allowed to expire, they put a 3-year authorization in to kick the can down the road, expired again in 2018, and finally Congress came together and made good on promises to secure its future. But now we go back to the original purpose of the coalition, which is like, we need mandatory off-budget funding for this thing. Like, let's get the funding there and go into the projects and not have this fake bank account full of IOUs from previous years' authorizations that were never fully realized. And, I don't know about you guys, but I went to college with a roommate who filled me full of IOUs every week, every time he had to go to the beer store. I'm never going to get that money back. Same way Congress is never going to reauthorize all those unappropriated dollars from the authorization in past years. And so, like, that's why, we're so focused on these important dedicated funds.
And a reminder to everybody from where that, originally LWCF, the source of funding, and again, there's a source of funding, there's authorized funding, but now the question is whether or not, like, those two things meet. The source of that funding is offshore oil and gas revenue. And so that's so if you're in a state, and there's a federal mineral, royalty, you're going to have, money's going to go to that state for every cubic, foot of gas or whatever that comes out. Well, on this oil and gas that's offshore, because that's the whole nation's money, that's not just a state's. What LWCF is, it pulls that amount of that federal royalty, comes in, and then it's redistributed to the states using a formula funding methodology. And I believe that that this reauthorization actually did specify, right? There's a 40-40-20.
It's a minimum of 40 for the states, a minimum of 40 for the federal government,
and then 20% that you can work with.
And then I think
20% goes to the discretion of appropriators.
Yep. And so everybody is on the same page with this. LWCF has, so first of all, the important part that sportsmen have really been hammering on, this is very trendy right now, access is very trendy, is at least 3% is for access now, which is exciting. And then that 40%, what that is that's going to states. And then for those of you who are in states and you would like to see more outdoor projects, there's nothing that says that can't be used for projects that might be related to access now, whether it's boat ramps or whether it's trailheads or whatever else. Every county in this nation has an LWCF project that was paid for with stateside monies, and those monies are going to the states using this allocation formula, and states get to decide whether that's going to go to a softball field in Missoula or whether it's going to go to a trailhead in Bozeman. And so those are projects that can, and just so you know, also, your state agencies are making a plan. They have a plan out there they do every year talking about how they're going to spend that money. So be involved in your states and talk with them about what the priorities should be in each given state. 40% of that is going to federal priorities. And so that's a number of programs like the Forest Legacy Act. I'm going to miss a bunch of them. What are some of the other?
Forest Legacy is actually a cool stateside program. Your former boss, Governor Meade, in his last few days, actually recommended a really cool Forest Legacy project in the Black Canyon and the Black Hills. Really amazing place for elk habitat, big game opportunities, and just from geological, like, cool place landscape moment. That is so important to have other states.
Grand Canyon of the
taking
Black
advantage.
Hills.
I'm sorry, yeah, not Black Canyon, Grand Canyon of the Black Hills.
Yep.
And I took the black thing too far with both of them, conflating them together. But thanks for the correction, Nephi.
Oh, that's okay.
I know you were instrumental in that, and your position with the office, and I'm sure Dave had a hand in helping out with that too. But that's a good example of how states can be empowered by a federal program like LWCF and bring money back home. And the new formula allocation that you just described in the reauthorizing legislation that keeps LWCF permanent now helps states have that greater certainty with 40% coming back to them. And I know that was a big reason why we got a lot of people that were a little bit on the fence with LWCF before. That really kind of pushed them over. Like, we were help bringing the money back home, and we need to maybe take some lessons from what you guys did here in Wyoming and export it to other states and teach them how to bring that money back home, because there are a lot of cool programs that they can
Montana
really
does
take
a
advantage of.
fantastic, and so does Colorado, of using that. And so that was actually one of the, and again, we're wonking out now. That was one of the big discussions.
I'm sitting over here glazing over, guys.
I was about to check for a pulse.
He's snoozing.
Moving on. What a great program. What a great example of moving past partisan. Like,
so LWCF is authorized federal spending. So, fill me in. RAWA, the new Recovery in America's Wildlife Act, that would be new spending. Isn't part of the hang-up, even though there's bipartisan support, is you got to offset that because of the congressional rules for PAYGO that you have to come up with. You gotta find spending reduction somewhere else in the budget to offset that 1.3 billion.
You're right.
That would get allocated to this, because right now that's going into the
general treasury. Right, that 1.3 billion is going to the general treasury, and that's something I've heard from a number of congressional offices. Is we like the concept. We definitely like the concept. We support this idea, but we have to know where the offset's coming from. Exactly what you described, and I don't think anybody's been able to really dive in and figure that out yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, right? Because these are already revenues being generated. We're not taxing the American people on something new. But the way the congressional budget rules work and the way scoring works with the Congressional Budget Office, these types of expenditures in number moving on paper scores in a way that makes it against the rules that Congress has established for itself for moving legislation going forward. Like, LWCF faces the same challenges when we talk about mandatory funding. So we have to find what they call an offset. And what Ryan called PAYGO, like, you have to pay for it somehow, even though it's already paying for itself in reality because they're existing revenues. And instead of going to the general fund, you're just saying, you know what, this is actually going to be carved out for this purpose, but you're not asking for new money that didn't exist before. You're using existing revenues that are in place now. There's that challenge. There's also some.
Can I break that challenge down a little bit more?
Yeah.
And just take it down to a super simple, because we're really wonking out talking about scorecards and everything.
That's what we do here.
I know, but I want to make this, and this may be oversimplifying, but I think this is one that maybe needs oversimplifying. So I'll look at it this way. And look at it like you have a family budget, like a budget for your house, for your home, your family, right?
Yeah.
And you've got a paycheck coming in, your offshore oil revenue. That paycheck is coming in, and it's going in to your joint bank account, and you're paying your mortgage, and you're paying your student loans, and you're paying your child care, and you're buying your food and everything. And now you're saying, here's this same amount of money coming in, but we want to take 50% of that or 20% of that, and I want to go on a trip, right? Yeah. And so I'm going to go on that trip, but I still want to be able to pay all these bills, or I have to cut something out. So I got to decide, okay, am I not going to have cable anymore? Am I going to stop with my cell phone? How am I going to account for. I've moved these funds that were already coming in. I was already getting them, but I want to put them someplace else. And how can I still balance my budget? And I think that's like I said, I may be oversimplifying it, but it's really where are we gonna make up that revenue, or what are we gonna cut to account for that movement of revenue?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way to help simplify it, like you said, but it is a little more complicated, right? You're looking at.
I'm trying to not make it complicated, but it is.
So let me keep going with your example there. I think that's a great way to couch it. Let's say that you're operating that way, but let's say you're also certain that your wife has a new job and she's going to be bringing more money in because she's going to be doing this new work that never existed before.
I like this idea.
Right? So now
I'm going to suggest it.
So now you're like, all right, we're drilling way more offshore than we ever have before. Technology exists now that we can get to recoverable resources that were previously irrecoverable. We're doing a better job. We're getting better at pulling oil and gas out of the ground offshore than we ever have been before. That's new revenue that we didn't account for 20 or 30 years ago before that technology existed. So maybe we do have a little play money to go to Belize on family vacation after all. And instead of sucking that into the general fund where, you're going to the Jones house next door and you're bringing over a bottle of wine and you're bringing over some fancy meats and cheeses, maybe instead of doing the normal day-to-day suck of your revenue, you're like, you know what, like, let's stick to our budget, but let's plan out in advance and let's acknowledge the fact that we got a little more resources coming into the family, and like, let's put it to a good place and let's on purpose save for our vacation and then take it on purpose one day. That's the kind of way we're looking at it. But if you go back to the LWCF dollars, that further complicates it, right? These are previously authorized dollars where you're like, all right, I already put this money in the jar, but
I was planning on using it for that.
Now I want it.
So let's take it a step further. It's like telling your children, like, here's your allowance for the week, and this is how much money you can spend every week. I'm gonna give you $25 to spend every week.
But I'd really like some pizza.
But
mortgage.
But at the end of the week, you're like,
yeah,
Mommy and Dad's mortgage is really a little bit more than we thought. Instead of giving you $25,
here's
like,
11.
We're only gonna give you 10 this week, but we promise we'll give it back to you later. And then you did that for over 50 years.
Yeah, you know what makes it...
And then someday your kids are grown and they're at their jobs. They're never going to come back to you and ask for that allowance money again.
And they're like, I am putting you in a home someday.
So now I'm gonna...
And we're going to put you in the cheap one because we got to pay for our own mortgages now. So I hope you like the oatmeal, Dad.
I want to complicate this even more by saying, like, this is one of the challenges.
I evidently I made a mistake trying to simplify this.
We're going down a rabbit hole.
Well, no, like, one of the things that...
Hold on to your skirts.
I want to go back and kill feral cats.
Hold on.
We were in a good place then, weren't we?
Getting back.
Can we go back to kitty bang bang, please?
Getting back to the extra job. So one of the things that makes this challenging is, and this is one of the arguments that was occurring 3-4 years ago with LWCF, is some people wanted mom to quit her job. And still want, it's because you're talking about offshore oil revenue. So you had some people who were saying, like, wait a minute, why aren't we putting, like, there are some folks who are saying we need,
we do invest in renewable energy development. Like,
that's right.
Are you guys just encouraging more fossil fuel development?
Yeah, and that's where the argument got.
That's coming up with Recovering America's Wildlife Act.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Green New Deal is going to kill Recovering America's Wildlife Act?
Let's not.
Man, you just...
Can we go back to kitty bang bang?
Now we'll go there. But that's one of the things, like, these things, as much as we wish that they were all simple,
Can we talk about something simple
now? They get
now?
challenging. Yeah.
Like legalizing 410s and...
Legalizing 410s is pretty simple.
That sounds like something that could be done.
We could...
Can I tell you guys about our whole campaign that I came up with that I ripped off directly from the marijuana people about legalizing 410s?
And here we're in Colorado. It's perfect.
It is. It's
Please do.
It's the gateway caliber.
The J.W. caliber. I want to remind everybody listening to Ryan that please remember, it's still a federal offense to smoke weed and own a gun. Don't do it.
I'm not advocating for smoking weed, but I want to point out in the state of Nevada, it's legal to smoke weed. It's legal to hire a prostitute. It's legal to gamble. But God forbid you kill a turkey with a 410. That's where they're going to draw the line. We now know where the moral line of Nevada is.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Bronson.
I said prostitute instead of hooker. I cleaned it up a little bit.
I was going to try and come up with an example
of something
for Oregon. No, it was going to be for Oregon. But but I think I imagine you didn't bring up Oregon, right?
Oregon already took care of it.
Yeah. Why can't they take care of this pumping gas thing?
Where some guy's coming out, you got a rental car, and you're going back to the airport, and you get out to go pump your own gas, and some guy's running at you like a spider monkey because you're going to use the gas pump.
I guess you pumped your own gas in Oregon.
You not only can you not pump your own gas, but the fine, like the criminal penalty for pumping your own gas, is higher than it is for littering.
Did you know in Oregon there's proposed, going back to legislation, there's proposed legislation this year to make it so you could only buy 20 rounds of ammunition total in a month. Mm-hmm. Now, tell me how that works if you're going to buy a box of shotgun shells.
Right.
You're never going to get a 25 straight.
Right.
Never going to happen.
I'll get to Station 5 and have to walk off the field.
You're done.
5 stand just became 4 stand.
I want to buy this box of ammunition, but here, you keep these 5 shells. I'm going to take these 20.
Are they defining it as any ammunition? I mean, it could be, or is it?
Yeah.
I mean, is it for long guns?
It was the limit that you could buy per month was 20 rounds. That was what, So, again, when you get folks writing regulations for things that they don't
understand,
it's like the liquor laws in Utah. They're written by folks that don't drink, and so they don't make a lot of sense. So, but that's the kind of stuff we talk about on Gravel.
Didn't you tell me?
You can subscribe to that on iTunes.
I'm the only Mormon that you have ever met that doesn't actually drink when he's not with other.
I know. I've known a number of Mormons that.
I was just saying, you accused me. You told me this big story. Now you're trying to claim that nobody in Utah understands.
Wait. Are you telling us, Nephi, that you're Mormon?
Dave, do we really want to go there?
I didn't know.
You are too. You just don't want to admit it.
I'm not. I do have.
Kitty, bang, bang.
Hey, I have a
change the subject.
We have a rule about we have a separation of church and podcast in this podcast.
I've talked about my heritage on this, right? I've talked about being
probably
a Morthlic.
Too much.
I've talked about being a more. Here we are on one of the most sacred days of the Catholic Church, recording this podcast, and so and
you're honoring
the
that
lick
by
portion of the Morthlic in me, is honoring Ash Wednesday. Whatever that means.
Just offended the Catholics and the Mormons.
But the Morth portion of me, I don't know what about. So half my family is Mormon, half my family is Catholic.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of weird. Some people think. But I've told that story before on this podcast about my mom's side of the family coming out on the Mormon Trail.
Yeah.
And being sent by Brigham Young to settle Montpelier, Idaho, and then that pivoted into my whole story about my great-grandfather
and
chasing...
your mom becoming a spy. Oh, yeah, Butch Cassidy.
Yeah, my great-grandfather chasing Butch Cassidy out of town on a bicycle in Montpelier, Idaho back in 1896.
That's awesome.
It's like a legendary story, and as an Idahoan, I thought maybe you'd heard this story before.
Here's a treat for everybody listening to this podcast. That's cool. If you've gotten to this moment at 1 hour and 22 minutes into this podcast, what's our giveaway today, Ryan?
We have a giveaway?
We're going to do a giveaway from Federal Premium Ammunition to the person who can go back and tell us which of our podcasts Dave told that story on.
What about the shirt you're wearing? Like the one with the cool TR bear chest riding the ostrich.
I wanted to come to that shirt because I thought it looked like So when you're up close, and I've seen that you wear this shirt all the time, right? And it's got Teddy Roosevelt riding every possible animal, like the
Teddy Roosevelt riding
like,
a moose.
It seems so American until he's riding an ostrich, and I can't figure that one out.
But he's shirtless riding
I know,
an
but
ostrich.
he's
like
like-
Vladimir Putin.
But he's like on a
with,
bear,
like,
on an eagle, on a moose, like
You know
all
what?
these American iconic
Swiss Family
and then an
Robinson is
ostrich.
it
what
reminds me of a combination of Swiss Family Robinson and groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons.
Yes.
When he just rips up his chest, he's like,
Yeah. And somehow
he's like,
it's
"Let's Lady Doris, watch
so-
me ride this ostrich."
a Hawaiian shirt.
So when I look at this shirt from a distance, like up close, yeah, we know what it is. But from a distance, I've been thinking about this as we're doing this podcast. I've been watching this, and I'm like, okay, from a distance, remember that game Oregon Trail?
Yeah,
yeah.
loved it.
Just
Like,
right up there with Carmen San Diego.
Like, I swear that's what I'm watching. I'm watching, like, all the bison running across the screen just randomly with rabbits and squirrels, and I'm just sitting here, like,
but with
wanting-
TR on top of him.
but but you can't tell
With
that
the shirtless
from,
Teddy
from
Roosevelt,
here. I can't see the
who's
shirtless
strangely
Teddy
super
Roosevelt.
buff.
All I want to do is shoot bison,
Which I don't
and
know
squirrels
that-
and rabbits.
Well, the
This is
legislation
historically
in Oregon
accurate.
killing the Oregon Trail game. 20 rounds of ammo, you wouldn't be able to survive.
No.
Not
Can
with
you
20
imagine
rounds.
that?
Just jumped out of his chair.
Because I brought sugar, I brought some flour, and I brought bullets.
As many as you could have
Like
many as I could- in fact-
1,500 rounds of ammunition. And then you'd go out, and this is teaching bad hunter ethics. I mean, we should talk about the Oregon Trail from a hunter ethics standpoint.
Yep.
Because you go out there and you shoot like 15 bison and 10 deer and 4 squirrels and a bunch of rabbits, and every single time you can pack 50 pounds of meat back to the, to the wagon.
That's it.
Like, that's all you can take.
Yeah.
So you just left thousands of pounds of meat in the field at every single stop, every time. And if you're like me and
Poisoning
you're playing,
condors.
if you were playing that game, you hunted every chance you got. Like,
Yeah.
you were running out of ammo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You had to get to the next trading post because you had to buy more. You had to trade a kid for ammo.
Right.
You know, whatever. Or, you know, hopefully the kid died of dysentery, so you had more room on the wagon for ammunition to shoot a bunch more bison, so you could put the 50 pounds of meat on your wagon. I mean, it's
Okay, so
like,
speaking
isn't
of
there a
that,
hunter ethic problem
there
there?
is. But that reminds me of a story of a former podcast guest you had, Chris Tymason, who came hunting with me in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, trying to kill his woodcock. And he showed
Wait a
up.
minute.
No, don't interrupt him. I want to hear this.
He showed up in Grand Rapids the night before we were to start hunting, and he was not feeling well. We went out and had dinner, and he couldn't eat. I went to my favorite pizza place in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Sammy's Pizza. Get the sausage and green olives. It's great. And he started puking and diarrhea. He had norovirus. And so he was dying of dysentery. And you know what? I left him in the hotel, and I went hunting. And
And you ate the cold pizza from the night before.
I ate a cold pizza
for breakfast.
but you know, so from 3 lawyers
See,
and
that's-
Nephi walked into a bar, fame.
Yeah.
I experienced him. He didn't die because I got him Imodium.
He's here.
He's here at the
somewhere.
conference. I got him Imodium AD. I got him red Gatorade because that's what he wanted, and I got him Theraflu, and then I left it on his door, and I went hunted grouse and woodcock.
So that's what you got to do.
What would you do if your buddy from Kansas is all the way up in northern Minnesota, but he's bedridden and dying of dysentery?
I would want to be as far away from him as possible.
I
too.
think he would want me to be as far away from him as possible. He'd want me to have a good time and really, experience things
I
that
was
he
nice
wasn't
that you
able to
brought him like
experience.
his favorite color of Gatorade, and like you just didn't buy the yellow stuff.
That's real sensitive.
Like, you know
Right.
what? He wants fruit punch. I'm gonna give him the red
Yeah,
stuff.
he wanted the red stuff, and I think in part because he wanted to be able to tell where he threw up, in his room, so he could clean it up.
Spot checking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the yellow stuff can blend in with the carpet.
Well, this has been informative.
Yeah, it has. I'm going to revisit in a future podcast, and I promise this. I'm going to revisit Oregon Trail. We're going to do a deep dissection of the Oregon Trail game.
There
Yeah.
should be with this R3 movement, right? That's a reactivation deal right there.
Yeah.
Just think of how many people I have friends that aren't hunters and they didn't grow up and their parents didn't hunt.
And you think this is the
Oregon
secret?
Trail was
This is
probably
going to get
their
him into
one that was their one recruitment deal to ever become a hunter.
And what they learned was shoot blindly,
This is
wildly.
why we have people who aren't in favor of hunting.
So maybe we can bring them around, right?
Oh, yeah,
We consider them the low-hanging fruit, and we can circle them back around.
Get it back in schools again. That's where I learned to play Oregon Trail. Was in typing class in like second grade.
If we can get Oregon Trail, after that we can get Hunter Ed back in schools everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what? I actually had lunch today with a sponsor for that bill in Colorado.
Really?
Yeah, guy's awesome. He tried. They brought it this year.
Jim
Didn't
McKean?
pass. It's awesome.
It's in some schools already, like more in rural areas where they acknowledge the value of that. But I think it would be great to help lift
get it
any
back.
barriers that might exist anywhere else and like encourage it and find resources to put it out there. Like, you know, we're probably not going to see our kids playing Oregon Trail on Carmen San Diego the same way we did, right?
Carmen San Diego.
Right, Carmen San Diego.
Oh, man.
Where in the world is Carmen San Diego?
Yeah, such a good game.
I mean, maybe she's with Ryan Bronson hunting in Namibia and chasing woodcock in Minnesota. I don't know, but maybe the kids these days aren't playing those games. So, but it's a good point that John brings up. We should be finding ways to infuse the things that they are using with hunter-friendly, forward-thinking ideas that make it fun and encourage the idea of going hunting and maybe with greater marksmanship than the Oregon Trail game
I had
portrayed.
great marksmanship. Like I said, I left this just trail of carcasses across Nebraska. And, you know, just unbelievable carnage.
My wagon can't hold this much meat.
50 pounds every time. So, like, all my kids died of dysentery, and I still can only put 50 pounds of meat in that wagon.
So there's a YouTube video that came out a couple of years ago where people did a real life making Oregon Trail into a movie. You got to find it. It's pretty hilarious because people of our ilk that remember the Oregon Trail on the Apple IIe they're gonna think it's the greatest thing ever.
I'm gonna go watch it right after this podcast.
Of us watching the Oregon Trail YouTube video,
just breaking it down,
right?
Yeah,
it's like,
just a breakdown.
It would be like a podcast of a podcast, kind of, right?
Yeah.
The irony, the game within the game.
So for those of you who have held on this long, Dave is going to send out a federal premium ammunition belt buckle.
Wait, no. Let's think this through.
I have.
Don't just go dropping. You just randomly. You're like, I'm doing.
It's not random, Dave. It's all strategic. You think it's.
But here's the thing. I kind of like the belt buckle, and I don't really want to.
Here's the problem.
I'm about to give away the clothing that Dave is wearing right now.
What if we send you a new federal premium sweatshirt and you can use that for a giveaway?
That is awesome.
That'd be a pretty good.
So to our listener, Dave, you decide which listener it's going to be.
I'll throw in a membership to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers too.
And a membership to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers to the first.
Yeah.
To the first individual. Is it the first? How do we do this? It's not the first.
No, it's not going to be the first.
It's going to be the individual that wears a size large sweatshirt.
So your suggestion. Hang on. Your suggestion
the minivan
was
guy. Like at 12:01 when the podcast launched, we had like 50 pictures of dudes hunting in minivans.
So here's what I think. Here's what I think we need to do. So you wanted to have it go back and to the podcast where
whichever
where
podcast
I tell the story.
Where you tell the story about your grandfather chasing Butch Cassidy
the first time. I think I've told it a couple of times.
At least.
It's a good story, and I didn't really actually tell it here. So you can't use this podcast as the one. That's not a loophole. That's not a loophole. It has to be an earlier one. So
the lawyer guy.
Yeah.
So I think what we'll do is we'll do this as a giveaway. You go back and find it, and you send us an email or reach out to us on social media and tell us. Our email is yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com, and you'll be entered to win. And follow us. Start following us on social media, and we'll make announcements there, further announcements on how to get involved in this giveaway. Right. So
and this is not. We're gonna have
that's where we'll lay it out. Is
we
on
have
that
a big giveaway coming. Just so everybody's clear, this is not the big giveaway. We're gonna do a much bigger one than this. So I don't want Dave to torture his mind because Dave's trying to think about.
Like, you put me on the spot here. How about this? Check us out on social media. Follow us on at the handle at It's Your Mountain on either Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all three of those places. We'll put out information about this giveaway on all those social media sites. We'll tell you how to enter to win a membership to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and a
Federal Premium Ammunition
the sweatshirt
sweatshirt
that I'm probably going to be buried in.
Not the same one. A sweatshirt like the sweatshirt that Dave's going to be buried in.
You might take the new one.
That's
and
a
then,
distinction without a difference.
His wife had picked out a nice suit, but
Yeah.
this will do instead.
Yeah, so
It'll
that's what.
be- is
that's
that
what
gonna
we'll
be
do.
under the suit or over it?
So stay tuned when this podcast drops. We'll at that time we'll put out information about this giveaway and tell you how to enter to win. All right.
So
How's that sound, Nephi?
I think that sounds fantastic.
That's what we'll do. Yep. All right. So we've had 2 of the 3 of you on this podcast before. I'll ask the question again if you want to answer it again. If you have another one, we always ask, what's your mountain? What's that place that's so meaningful, important to you? If you have more, sometimes people have more than one. They have a tough time picking just one. So if you want to, you've both been here before. You've mentioned one before. If you want to mention another one, do. John, you have to do this one.
Yeah,
for
this
us.
is like the Bob Barker moment, right? Always spay and neuter your pets, right? I mean, that's a big deal. So I would say that it's hard to narrow it down, right? It really is when you look down to it. So I grew up in Iowa, and I still now will go down and visit my family, and I'll drive past farm ground that I spent and walked for hours upon hours trying to chase birds and go through that. And so to go back and see those areas and to see those places that are still wild, even though they're in row crop of Iowa, to me that's kind of the my mountain, I guess, of where I'm at. And I've been around and traveled around to a lot of different places and had a lot of experiences on mountains and doing different things and hunting and chasing. But for something about going back there to where you first were introduced into the sports and going through and chasing those things, and so to drive past those same places and have, whether it's my wife or whoever it is that's sitting next to me, that that area, that particular place doesn't mean anything to them, but then to know that you had that memory and you were there and you shot, your 2 roosters with your brothers that same place, and that's a cool deal.
That is a cool deal,
Yeah.
and I think so many people can relate to that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's not, it's nowhere fancy, right? I mean,
it's deeply personal.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. What about you, Ryan? You want to do this again?
I will do it again. If you remember last time I got choked up.
You did.
And that was because I was talking about my spot on my farm where I've killed a couple deer. This one I won't get nearly as choked up about. It's the place where I got engaged to my wife. But the whole story is more important than this. I had asked my wife to marry me, and she didn't give me an answer for over a week. This was in August.
It's an important decision.
It was. This was August of 2003 when I proposed. Well, bear season starts September 1st in Minnesota. And so she was with me. We went up to Grand Rapids, and I was paddling down the La Prairie River north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, to go do a bait station, and she was with me. And I set up the bait and everything. Season wasn't open yet. It was opening next weekend. And we were paddling back, and we got to a little sandbar, and it's August, and it's hot. And we stopped, and it was just a gorgeous little spot. And we were just, had our feet out of the canoe in the sandbar. And my wife turns to me, and she says, "Yes." I'm like, "Yes, what?" I didn't, it was a non sequitur. I was thinking about, I wonder which of these stands the bear's going to come hit, and things like that. And she said, "Yes." I'm like, what? I don't know. And she said, "Yes, I'll marry you." And it happened while I had my feet in the La Prairie River on a sandbar north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, surrounded by, it was cedars and stuff like that. Now, that's a really cool spot, and I want to go back there with her someday, and I haven't, but it's very clear to me in my mind. But it doesn't get me all choked up like my deer hunting spot does.
I actually think that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to let your wife listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
I do these things because then I know if she does listen, because I try to trigger her, because then she'll bring it up.
She'll bring it up. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's a good one. I won't say the same thing I said last time, but I think mountains play kind of a literal background role in my life in general. And I had the fortunate circumstance to live in Colorado, and we're surrounded by mountains. And I live up in the mountains here, just southwest of Denver, about an hour away. And when my daughter was born, she was born in Boulder, Colorado, and this cool hospital there, and we had this great view of the mountains and the Flatirons, and so I always think about that cool place where my daughter was born, and my first child and my only child, and every backdrop for her whole life since that day has been a mountain, and that's really cool and special to me. It gets me a little bit choked up, and when I think about the moment where she was born, and I think about the moment where she caught her first fish up in the Collegiate Peaks Wilderness area outside of Buena Vista in Salida, Colorado, it's pretty special. And so I'll take that as my mountain moment for this podcast.
Now I'm going to do one. We all have to, right?
Ooh.
Because we've got. So my mountain moment is this place Dave told me about.
Oh no!
The Winter Range,
Secret mountain.
So Dave, I was talking.
Oh, no.
September.
Snow Mountains.
September. I had 2 days. I needed to go. I wanted to take my 5-year-old bow hunting, and hoping that I was never going to see elk. Unfortunately, Dave sent me to a spot that was full of elk. I won't say where that spot was, but I was like,
Thank you.
but I just was like, okay, I'm going to get lucky. I just need to hike around the woods with him. So he may have been 4 at the time, but it's my oldest son who's now 8. I had him strapped to my backpack, like basically like in the the meat shelf.
Yeah.
So he's sitting in the meat shelf of my backpack because he's too little to walk around like the place we're walking. He got tired after like mile number half.
Yeah.
And we're hiking around, and he was just loving it. And wouldn't you know it, is you're trying to go for a hike with your bow, and what happens? You run into elk. So there you are in the elk with the 4 or 5-year-old whatever on my back, and he's like, "So yeah, you're gonna get one, right?" And you're like, "Oh no!" So now you're a couple miles back in there with the kid attached to your back, a bow, and like, well, maybe. And so you're like 20 yards away from a cow elk. And I'll leave the story there. We won't finish the story.
You've finished the story on this before.
Yeah, but that place, like that experience of like being like out there with my 4-year-olds who then became furious with me for my failure to do justice to what he felt like the experience how it should have ended. But like being out there on that camping trip in the mountain with my son, my family, and knowing that that was an opportunity that I was going to get to share that mountain and that experience with him, hopefully, for the rest of my life, and that hopefully he'll be able to share that experience, with the next generation too. Like that to me, like that's my mountain, trying to build that place.
That's cool.
And see how great that story was when nobody interrupts it?
I don't actually have to do this, do I?
Yep.
Everybody did.
We've never done it this way.
Well, it's
Like we've never, ever done it this way.
Says the man-
You've never had a room full of guys and empty beer cans at midnight in Colorado before.
Yeah, we have.
Okay.
Not on the podcast, though.
Yeah.
Man. All right. So I've talked about mine on this podcast before. So and I talk about like the pinnacle place, right? But if I were to pick a close second, it's the Sawtooths of Idaho, right? My grandparents lived in this small town of Gooding, Idaho, right? And they owned a farm just outside of Gooding on the Snake River. Lived in Gooding, and then they had a cabin up near Ketchum. And because of that, they they raised my dad and his siblings going up into the Sawtooths, and they started going to Redfish Lake. And I hate to give this the exact location up, but it's so commercialized now. Who cares? It's not the same as it used to be.
Yeah.
Right? So it was a place, Redfish Lake. Right? They started going there year after year after year, and then my dad and his siblings had kids, and that's where we would go summer after summer. We'd go visit the grandparents in Gooding. We'd go fish in the canals around Gooding, in the irrigation canals. Then we'd go up and spend time up at Redfish Lake and hike around in the Sawtooths, hike up to Sawtooth Lake. Right? And we all grew up, moved out of the house, and now every few years we do a family reunion where every surviving member of the family comes from all over the country, and we go back and we go to Redfish Lake. I honeymooned there, and we do trip after trip there, and it's totally commercialized, this lake, but it's just the setting that it's in, and the mountains, the Sawtooths are just this, they live up to their namesake.
Yeah.
Right. You get in there and it's just kind of awe-inspiring what these mountains are. And it's just the family tie and all the history to it. And just this is the place where family comes together to recreate. And I've now had the opportunity to take my own kids to Redfish Lake. And it's just, that's my place.
It's cool. It's commercialized, but it's still campy. It
can be.
It's still campy. Like, it's still a dirt road, and
it's
cool.
Paved all the way in.
Is it paved now?
Like, it's paved all the way into what once were cabins. Like, you think of the cabins with the flickering light when you turn it on and everything. Like, now it's they tore all that stuff down. They rebuilt all the cabins. They've got a marina there. They charter boats across with glass bottoms so you can try and look and see.
We took
the salmon.
We took one family from every state in the West when we were with Governor Meade's office. We brought them all out to Grand Teton National Park. Most of them had never camped before. Just remember, for all of us who are proud of like how extreme our experiences can be, when you bring somebody brand new and they've never been out there, that kid from the city, glamping to them is just the adventure of a lifetime. It's like nothing they've ever seen, and that can start them down the path. So with that...
That's true. Hey, thanks. We spent way more time than we normally would on a podcast. Really appreciate it. Touched on a lot of cool subjects. Went on gravel for a while in places too.
And
available on iTunes,
off of the road sometimes.
I'd be remiss if that's what I ended it with.
Yeah.
Remember, head out and find our podcast out there too. It exists. Your Mountain is out there. Every place you find podcasts. Download us, subscribe.
You're listening to it now.
Give us a rating.
So.
You're listening to it now, right? But if you haven't rated us yet, get out there, give us 5 stars. We'd appreciate it. And in the meantime, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.